Okay, I am a little surprised myself that I'm already sitting here again in this chair just 3 days after the last video. But I want to thank Henry, Metal0, and Beaver Roots for suggesting that we maybe talk a little bit about the Therion deck moving forward with Darkwing Blast and how the set is going to affect the deck list and the deck in general, if it can still compete for the next 2 to 3 weeks until the Ishizu stuff is coming. If you remember, this was the list that I played at YCS Utrecht. I showed it off a couple of days ago, and I want to switch, just keep this picture in your mind, I want to switch to the deck list that I think I'm going to run moving forward. So not a lot of stuff is going to change. So this is basically the change deck list. Only 3 cards in the main deck I would like to switch. I would cut the Sulliek from the main deck, and I switch a couple of things in the side deck and the extra deck. I do also in this video want to talk about some concerns that I have heard from people about the deck, or some questions that may have come up. The first thing a couple of people commented was that this was more or less a Lonefire combo deck, and what do you do if you don't see your Lonefire or you get hand trapped on your Lonefire Blossom? Doesn't the deck fall apart then? So I want to give you a little bit more insight on how I built the deck. So the Therion cards I felt were really nice, and the Tearlament cards also really nice, but Rhino Heart was not really that great of a normal summon for the deck alone, because if your Kid Colossus or your Rhino Heart gets stopped, then you're really in trouble. Then you're actually in trouble because your Therion cards don't do anything in your hand. As opposed to if your Lonefire Blossom gets stopped, for example, you can still tribute it and use it for Borea to extend to some degree. So I wanted to find a nice normal summon, and Lonefire just fit all the criteria, and it's not like you have to play a ton of bricks, it's just one brick, the Cobra. The Scorpio is a nice card to draw, and Lonefire, worst case, you banish your Instant Fusion or your Cobra or your Scorpio with the Pot of Desires. You can still summon out the Borea, and then it's just a normal summon, a nice normal summon for your deck. So I really view this as a control deck that can sometimes, if you draw the Lonefire Blossom, go in first, or sometimes even go in second if you can push through the negates first, be an incredible combo deck that just puts up an unbreakable board. And this theory also, you could say, flourished or worked in the tournament. And I think moving forward, this is not going to change. There is not going to be a whole lot of negation that adds to the already existing ones for Lonefire Blossom. Then another question that came up is, why do you play 3 Therion Charge? So 3 Therion Charge, this card on first glance also seems not that great, because it can be ashed, and if it gets negated, it's just a -1. But if you look at the current format, no one is playing Ash Blossom, so that's an argument for it. And if you go second, there's not really a lot of negates. This entire deck is based around the fact that in the current format, there are not going to be a lot of like hard Omni negates. This is going to change in the next format. Baron de Fleur is probably going to be a card that is going to see a lot of play. And I think this is the most problematic thing for this deck. As soon as there are Omni negates in the format, this deck is going to be struggling a lot more than previously. I think it makes more sense to talk about the deck in a vacuum in Darkwing Blast first, before talking about the matchups that can come up and how the deck is going to interact with other decks in the format. So one addition to the deck is going to be Sprite Sprint, and I want to show you something really quickly. So your Lonefire combo actually gets a little bit different, or better you can say, or you just have a lot more variety with it than previously. So let's just have a random starting hand. This works fine. You can normal summon your Lonefire Blossom as discussed previously, so you do the same thing. You summon out your Scorpio, you discard any random card, it doesn't really matter. Then you summon out the Cobra, you add the Instant Fusion. You can then use these two to go into Cross Sheep. You use Instant Fusion. I'm not going to pay the 1000 for now, just for the quickness sake, and then we're going to use both effects. And now instead of adding Merle, you can actually add the Rhino Heart. So you can now use the Lonefire Blossom again, thin out your deck a bit more, get the other 2 Lonefire Blossoms out of the deck. You can special summon the Lily Borea. Now you use the Kid Colossus to special summon the Rhino Heart. Now we're gonna assume that Chainlink 1 is gonna be Rhino Heart, Chainlink 2 Kid Colossus, and we're just gonna mill 5 random cards that don't do anything, just for the sake of this combo show off. Alright, we just mill 5 cards that don't do anything. Then we mill a Halfness or a Sheeran. It doesn't matter which one we mill. So you mill this, and then you use the effect to put this back to the bottom and put your Kid Colossus back to the bottom, and you summon your Garura. Then you can use the Cross Sheep and the Garura to go into the Sprite Sprint. Then you draw a card with your Garura, you use the Sprite Sprint effect, and then you can send the Merle. And the Merle can then be used for with Garura for a Mud Dragon. So now you actually have access to Dweller, but you also have access to Bahamut Shark if you wanted to play this. If you really wanted to, there is enough space in the extra deck that you can make the space for the Bahamut Shark and the Totally Awesome. I don't think it's going to be necessary. You already have an Omni Negate in your deck. So this is really nice because now obviously the Sprite Sprint, we're just going to keep it on board. And you are going to have a Dweller on board. So I think it's really nice. Also, I think Cowboy is a lot more accessible now post Darkwing Blast with this deck, because this deck didn't really have a win condition should you go in time, really. So now we can use the Therion Lily Borea, of course, as always. We disregard our hand for now, and you just search the Regulus, and then you can equip the Borea. So this is maybe a standard combo that you can go for now. It's pretty nice. I mean, you can put up a Dweller. Is it going to be what you're always going to want to do? I don't think so. Not versus every deck. But it is something that you can reliably end on. So Sprite Sprint, I would say, is the one card that changes our combo quite a lot. You could also think about playing Tearlament Scream. I mean, probably most of you guys know this card. So Scream, obviously, if you normal special summon a monster and you control a Tearlament monster, you can mill 3 cards. All your opponent's monsters then lose 500 attack. If it's milled, you can add a Tearlament trap. I found the Tearlament traps in this version of Tearlament to be very suboptimal. I didn't like it at the YCS. I even said this in the last video, and I wouldn't play them. Because they're just a brick if you draw them, and you don't search it often enough to make it beneficial enough for your deck. The deck only really is that good because you play so many Therions, and that's what makes it consistent. It's not the low amount of Tearlaments that is a problem, and you don't really want to bump up the number of Tearlaments to make the Scream work in your deck. I would personally add the 3 Fenrir because the Bystial cards are not going to be very strong in your main deck. They don't really give you any benefits, really. So the Fenrir, I think, any deck that you don't play Bystials in, you play the Fenrir. The only problem I have seen with this is that you run into Super Poly a lot more if you end on Regulus and Fenrir, which this is a deck that never runs into Super Poly. By the way, even with the Dweller board and the Sprite Sprint, even if you end on Regulus plus Hope Harbinger in addition, you don't run into Super Poly. So I think it's a nice argument for the deck. But the Fenrir, it's a bit problematic. If you're aware of it, you can sometimes play around it by summoning a Borea and just equipping it with the Regulus. But I'm not really too sure right now if I really want to go that route. But it is obviously an amazing card in theory. So let's talk a little bit about the deck, not in a vacuum, but in interaction with the other decks that are in the format. I think that there is going to be a large number of Bystial decks running around in any shape or form. So may it be Dragon Link Bystial, or may it be branded Bysted. You can play them in other decks as well. You can play them in Tearlament. They're very commonly played, but also other rogue decks. So I like this version of Tearlaments, the Therion deck, because obviously you're not as affected by the Bystial monsters, and also your Regulus can protect your Tearlaments if should they hit them. And even if they summon all their Bystial monsters, as long as it's not Magnamut, which is a completely broken one, of course, that gets them advantage back, I often feel like it's not really that big of a problem, because your Tearlament effects are just, how do you say, they're just free pluses for your deck. The Therion deck really doesn't rely on the Tearlaments. It's just sort of an addition. If you mill them, they're great, and you get an easier way to victory, but not reliant on them as much. So I don't think the Bystial cards are going to be a huge problem for this deck. What I do view as a bit of a problem is the new Tearlament deck, because the new Tearlament deck puts up Baron de Fleur plus Rukalos plus sometimes Dweller, which is definitely problematic for this deck, because Rukalos and Baron, and sometimes they have Crime as well, but all of those cards negate your Therions in hand, which is very problematic, because you really need those to stick on board so you can start getting advantage with your Discolosion. So that is going to be a problem. So what we have to ask ourselves is if there is a solution to that problem. I do think that there is a somewhat solid solution for it. I don't think that the inherent matchup is going to get easier that way, but you do have some countermeasures at least. So you have the Bystial cards, of course. I think most people are going to side them anyway, and they are going to be very strong versus Tearlament. You just search the Druid Swarm with the Magnamut, and even though you don't have a great target for the Magnamut apart from the Druid Swarm, it doesn't really matter. You just search this, and this should mostly be very nice versus the Tearlament deck and also versus the branded deck. But the big advantage of this deck is that you can play Lava Golem and Sphere Mode, which personally I think is going to be amazing in the upcoming formats in the next few weeks. If you play some regional or some locals or whatever, I think those two cards, if you can play a deck that is able to fit those cards into your deck where you don't really need your normal summon, is going to be really strong. So what do is you just side out your Cobra, your Scorpio, your 3 Lonefires, and your Cross, and then go in second, you side in these 3. And versus the Tearlament deck, you can also side in the Bystials, put out the Super Polis, and 1 Fenrir. That's what I have done so far, and it's worked reasonably well. So you have a lot of go in second cards that that will be able to deal with the bolts mostly. So I think that Sphere mode is going to be really strong. Lava Golem is obviously the safe one, where you can just tribute the Rukolos and the Baron, and it's pretty strong. And then there can be only one, and Harpy's Feather Duster. This is mainly for Fluanderies. You cannot ignore that matchup we're going forward either. And Harpy's Feather Duster just as a back row removal. I have to say that you don't really need to have a lot of back row removal in general with this deck, because the Therions are actually incredible versus Eldritch, for example, because no Floodgate really affects you. Neither Rivalry, there can be only one goes in. It doesn't really matter, because you just put one Therion monster on board and equip it with the Ain. And then you can just start popping all their back row or the annoying Floodgates. If they get rid of your body, it doesn't really matter, because as long as you have Colosseum up or any way to Agira system in your graveyard, you can just, you know, recur all the resources. So that's how I won my round 3, I think it was at YCS Utrecht versus Eldritch. They had all the Floodgates, but it doesn't really matter versus this deck. So all in all, I do think that this deck is still a reasonable pick post Darkwing Blast. It is going to be a bit weaker into Tearlament. It is going to be problematic, but you have countermeasures for it. So it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know if I will be playing the deck moving forward. I think the Branded Blister deck is looking pretty interesting. Maybe you want to show off that deck as well on the channel. I think it would be nice, because I think it's a bit slept on right now. But also not sure if it's maybe not worth it with the new Ishizu stuff coming out very soon, which is probably going to make every other deck pretty much irrelevant, unfortunately. I like the Darkwing Blast format. It's looking pretty cool. So I guess enjoy it while you can. And this was just a quick video explaining what Darkwing Blast will have of an impact on this deck. And that's already it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.